Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our True Talk Thursday vodcast. Tonight is our second episode of a three-part series, and we have the honor and privilege of featuring a great panel discussion around assessments. But this week in particular, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the data piece. So the folks that we have here today will be sharing what their data assessments truly indicate, the ways in which we can tailor these assessments to become more equitable, and then ultimately offering suggestions for evolving the aggregated data that they collect in our schools, states, and nation as a whole. Driving the conversation tonight, we have Dr. Maria Armstrong, who is the Executive Director of ALAS, and co-facilitating the conversation alongside her, we have Dr. Atiba Weza, who is the Executive Director of NASB. All right, Maria and Atiba, take it away.
Thanks, Francois. So, wow, talk about an esteemed panel. I just see numbers all over the place here. We get to talk numbers. So, and aptly so, the theme of tonight's session is data obsession, the influence of numbers. I just love how that plays into what we're going to be talking about, because we want to introduce our panel, and you'll probably agree here that these are the right people in the room. So we have Woody Pape he's from Curriculum Associates. He's the Executive VP. And Woody, you want to give us just a brief bio about what you do?
Yeah, sure. I look at data with mostly large urban city school districts across the country and try to figure out if I can be helpful. Primarily, we're looking at assessment data from our program called iReady, which is used by about 25% of the public school K-8 kids in America. And I've been there about 11 years. I'm a former teacher, and I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. We're glad to have you. Ebony Walton, Senior Statistician of the National Center for Education Statistics. Welcome, Ebony.
Hello. Thank you. Hi, Maria. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm Ebony Walton. I work for what we call the nation's report card, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, that tracks progress across elementary, middle, and high school, just looking at how students are doing across the country and in states. I've been working on this program for almost 15 years as a contractor and working for the government directly. And I work on reporting and dissemination. So my main job is to communicate the data to various audiences. So thank you.
Thank you. And we also have Dr. Jeremy Roschelle, who is the Associate Director for Journal of the Learning Sciences out of Digital Promise.
Yeah, so I'm a researcher. At Digital Promise, we're working with about 115 school districts across the country, looking for ways to improve teaching and learning. And so my job is to help understand what works and makes it better. One example would be we're working on an exciting program of online remote tutoring, where a human tutor works with an individual child. And by looking at assessments, we're able to see the very strong impact that's made with some of our Latinx students who who the support in math is tremendously helpful to.
Excellent. Well, we're so excited to have all of you here tonight. And so we're not going to fire around any questions. We're just going to use some questions to start a conversation. Atiba, do you want to lead us in that conversation?
Sure, why not? Every year in New York, around towards the end of the school year, the commissioner of the state and the mayor of New York City convene press conferences where they give the state report cards, how students perform in the assessment, grades 4, grades 8, and so forth. And following that, there's a big brouhaha, which schools did well, which schools did not do well, and so forth. Why is that important? Why are these numbers so important, and why the big deal about them?
Sure, I'll be happy to jump in. All our attention is drawn to horse races all the time. I'm not sure it's the best use of our attention. I'll say one way in which I think the numbers are important, and one way which I wish our attention were different. Let me start with what I wish were different. I think the spread in the numbers and the variation we see is often much more interesting than the number itself. We have school districts that some kids are doing wonderfully in, and some kids need a lot of more attention, a lot more resource. And so looking at the spread can get us beyond that single number and redirect us to what we really need to do. And the one way I think, numbers can be good is if we didn't have any numbers, we have the phenomena that every parent thinks their school is above average. And we wouldn't know that really there are big differences in our country and that there are inequities we need to address. And so I think numbers help us see the problem that we have to tackle.
Yeah, I can jump in. Thank you, Jeremy. I'd start with a positive. I mean, the obsession with the numbers is a good thing insofar as like we live in a divided country, right? And the obsession with the numbers does reflect very positive intent, right? That it's the one thing that we can all agree on, that we all agree is critical to success of individuals or schools or communities or whatever it may be. For me, the trouble with the numbers tend to be twofold. One is, let's just say I'm a teacher in a class and I told you that the average test score was a 70. Well, what if half the kids got 100 and half the kids got 40? Those are two fundamentally different perceptions of what's happening. And sometimes I think just looking at the one number, I think to build off of Jeremy's point, can be misleading and not particularly helpful in terms of what we want to do for the kids going forward. And the second thing I'd say is I personally think we might be looking in many cases, spending too much time looking at the wrong numbers. And what I mean by that is summative data is important for so many different reasons, but it is a backwards view of how I did yesterday, right? And I can't change that. Formative data, by semantic definition, is to inform next steps. So we should be focusing, in my opinion, on that which can inform instructional next steps more than we focus on a backwards view of how did I do yesterday, or a summative test, if you will. They're both incredibly important, but I think at least in the public discourse, it's all about the summative, right? Whereas I think it would be more helpful if we were thinking about what can a teacher do with the data? How can a teacher help an individual child, right? My own personal view.
So just to springboard off of Woody, I completely agree, but working for a summative assessment, I will say that why are data important? It really relies on the purpose of the data. Okay, and so when you look at NAEP data, when you look at the nation's report card, it's very important to understand that the purpose of NAEP is to track progress over time across the country for student groups, not individual students, not schools. It's really to get a sense of the condition of education, how things are changing across time. And so, by understanding the purpose, you can get a sense of why that information is valuable and valuable to different people. And so I definitely agree. All of these types of data have their role and importance, and it's important to understand the purpose behind them before you use them.
And Ebony, just a quick plug of my love of NAEP. The reason we find NAEP uniquely valuable as we look at all sorts of data is because of what you said. It's that because it's a consistent scale over time and a consistent view across states nationally is unbelievably helpful to us to get a sense of what's really going on in the world.
Yeah, I just want to also sing NAEP's praises for a moment. When states cheer about their scores, there's two possibilities. It could be the kids are really doing better, or it could be they made the test easier. And NAEP is the only yardstick we have. And we have seen through NAEP that some states over time seem to be doing better only because they're making the test easier. So that's vital. The other thing I use NAEP for, and I love it for, is it has these bands of performance, basic, below basic, or proficient. And by learning from NAEP, we can understand what proficiency really is. Because we can see the kinds of conceptual in mathematics, it's the more conceptual items, the ones that require multi-step problem solving, those stand out as that's what we need to be teaching all our kids. And when we're underserving our low income, our Black and brown kids, what we're often underserving them in is conceptual understanding and this more extended problem solving. So I refer to NAEP all the time for its ability to show us what we need to do as a nation.
Yeah. And you know, we start this obsession really at a young age. We start with grades, right? We teach our kids what is the equivalent to a grading system. And then it moves up the food chain, if you will, where now you're looking, you know, parents are looking at the school report card, and it has an impact on the zip code. And it just continues to grow, you know, from that point of school ratings and how administrators and teachers react to those scores and where their focus and dollars are pushed in that direction. And then internationally, as a nation, just like you said, you know, we look at, that's the nation's report card. Where's our standing there? And we're not even talking about internationally with the PISA. So it's, you know, there's a lot, you're right. I agree with Ebony in the sense that it's what is the purpose? And we have so many types of assessments, and that's really what we want to bring you all here for, is to start to break that down for folks to understand. You know, each one of you work with data in your own right. What does your data, the data that you individually work with, what is it showing? What does it indicate? Yeah, anyone can jump in at any time on that one.
I was trying to calibrate how much information you wanted, but so
Go ahead, it's a data dump. Go for it.
So again, contextually, just to understand, we get data with about a quarter of the public school kids in America for K-8, just to give you that context. And I guess generally speaking, there is, whatever you want to call it, COVID learning loss, whatever you want to call it, is significant, but it is significantly smaller than what was largely predicted if you look at just sort of the public and national discourse, which we've sort of suspected the whole time. It is definitively higher in math across the board than reading. However, our data suggests that the biggest dips in reading as far as COVID loss are in grades 2 and 3, which I think we all have, you know, spent a lot of time understanding the criticality of those particular grades and the snowball effect of what happens. I was just quoting NAEP data today, I think, that says if you can't read at grade level by grade 3, the likelihood of high school graduation diminishes 4-fold or something. Ebony can correct me if I got that incorrect, but something to that degree. We're also seeing that it is as predicted, although the overall loss was smaller than what was largely predicted. It definitively was more pronounced for lower income communities and was definitively more pronounced for schools that are predominantly comprised of students of color, right?
Right.
And the last thing I'll say, which is, I got to be careful with assessment folks on the phone, but we did do something funny. We did insert a question, one new question into our assessment that simply asked whether you're in your school building.
If you're what?
Whether or not you are taking this test within your school building.
Ah, okay.
And it has become incredibly valuable because guess what? Different testing environments have rendered different testing results. When the kids take the test at home, it renders different results for lots of not so good reasons and for lots of totally reasonable reasons, right? So that particular decision has been vital for us to have a view around apples to apples. Like, what am I comparing? Because I know, I am quite confident that everyone would agree, when you compare test results from completely different testing environments, you're going to have a problem in terms of drawing any conclusions.
Yeah, you know, there was, and I said, I pre-warned my granddaughter who's in high school, and I said I was going to share her story should this issue come up about the testing environment. They're on a hybrid schedule, so 4 days in class, 1 day at home. And when she's taking an assessment, it's at home and, you know, any kind of class task, but you can't, once you hit that enter button, you cannot go back. And so she's got, depending on what class she has that day when they stay home, you've got kids that are in class who can't erase a paper and change their question. And you don't have the capacity to go back. So we can hear the scream from Utah when she hits that button. So you're right, the testing environment has a huge effect on the good and the bad part. And it's being able to work that through that we're having to have this discussion around. Yeah, Ebony.
Sure. So, my data predate COVID-19. And basically, as a national assessment, we just released our grade 12 data for math and reading. And so that culminates our data collection at grades 4, 8, and 12 in math and reading. And basically the story is lower achieving students performed worse over time, while high achieving students have gotten better over time. That's the narrative, and we're seeing that across the board. We're seeing that in different subjects. And, as far as theories and hypotheses of this pattern, they abound. We don't have one reason, but we're seeing this pattern is consistent, it's strong. We're seeing lower achieving students, they're performing worse than they did 10 to 15 years ago, okay? Where the highest performing students are performing, their best scores in some cases. So again, I don't work in policy, I just point to the data, and I'm hoping that people are looking at the data to hopefully fix these trends, because it is pretty strong, it's pervasive.
Yeah, boy, I'd love to pick up on both your remarks, Woodrow and Ebony, just for a second. One thing we've been looking at is what can we do about this? And one place that might be coming from is if you look at the extra resources that parents in more affluent communities are able to provide. One is tutoring. And so we've been looking at this program that brings online remote tutoring to low-income neighborhoods and supplies the kid with a math tutor in 4th or 5th grade twice a week, about a half an hour each time, and for a long stretch of time, 3 or 4 months. And so one of the things we want to know is we want to benchmark if we're able to provide this resource to our low-income children. And in this case, the sample we had was mostly on the West Coast. It was mostly Latinx children in the particular sample of the study. Can we benchmark this and understand that use the assessment data to understand the value relative to the cost of that tutoring? And what we found was a very strong effect. In technical terms, it's about 0.5 effect size, but nobody knows what effect sizes mean. So just a quick way to translate that is if you go to school for an entire year, the gain in your math score is usually around somewhere between 0.3, 0.4, 0.5 as an effect size. And so this is on par with going to school for a whole year. So giving our low-income children, our Black and brown children, when they need it, an online remote math tutor seems like a policy that maybe we need to look at some more. And I'm not alone in saying this. There's a lot of people looking at, can we equalize in our society who gets tutoring?
Definitely. I love that thinking because, we're so fixated sometimes in the way we've always done business, right? And if anything, this has catapulted us into, I hope, the kick in the pants that we need to start being a little bit more innovative because, the trends that we're seeing and the data to support those trends, we've known it qualitatively in our classrooms, right? For unfortunately decades. So now that we have this two-dimensional way of looking at it, where everybody's staying at home, then now maybe it will get the attention. I know that Tiba and I, when we talk about what is our policy focus as an organization, we're definitely looking at it through this lens. Right, Atiba?
Yes, indeed you are. But I want to go to something that Woody said earlier about the summative and the formative. Given that, why are boards of education, policymakers so hung up on the summative part of it, and not, when the scores are released in New York, we have superintendents and board members asking, how did we do compared to X, ranking? Because, I worked most of my career as an administrator on Long Island, New York, where, real estate prices are skyrocketing, taxes are high. So it was, where the best schools are, that's where the real estate prices are higher. And that's where the school board members are more concerned about how did we do compared to District X, District Y, as opposed to what do we need to do to make those kids who did not do as well as they could have better. As statisticians and so forth, how does that resonate with you? And how do you think we ought to move the needle from where it is to where it ought to be?
And as par for the course, Atiba always sets us up for this cliffhanger. So we'll be right back to hear those answers.
Hey there, and don't forget, if you like what you hear and want to gain some more insight into what school districts are facing now, then tune in every Thursday at 7 p.m. or subscribe below. We thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great night.